Everyone laughed at a rejected mail-order bride, until the most feared mountain man growled, "She's mine now." In the dusty street of a Colorado town, she was mocked, shamed, and left with nothing. The stagecoach was waiting to take her back east, until a scarred recluse stepped forward, silencing the crowd with just 4 words. But life in the mountains isn't mercy alone. Behind every hymn she hums, a fire from the past haunts him, and in the shadows, a greedy merchant plots to take their land, willing to burn down everything to claim it. Now, the woman no one wanted holds the key to his redemption, and the man everyone fears may be the only one who can keep her safe. When the flames rise and the whole town turns to watch, will she stand tall beside him, or lose everything again under the weight of his curse? Drop a comment below, and share which part of the world you're tuning in from today. If you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe for more. The autumn wind whipped around the corner of Silverton's dusty depot, cutting through Sophia Whitley's thin calico dress like a knife. She pulled her worn shawl tighter, but it did little to ward off the mountain chill that seemed to mirror the coldness in her heart. The wooden bench beneath her creaked as she shifted, trying to find comfort where there was none to be had. The sun was sinking behind the jagged peaks, painting the sky in shades of amber and purple that might have been beautiful under different circumstances. But tonight, Sophia could barely lift her eyes from her trembling hands folded in her lap. The cruel laughter from earlier still echoed in her ears, as persistent as the clicking of the telegraph inside the depot. "Dear Lord," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the evening breeze, "grant me strength in this dark hour." The prayer came automatically to her lips, as natural as breathing, though right now each breath felt like a struggle against the tightness in her chest. Thomas Green's words had cut deeper than any physical wound could have. A dowdy farmer's daughter, he'd called her, his handsome face twisted with contempt as he'd looked her up and down. The memory of his fine coat and polished boots, so at odds with his ugly words, made her cheeks burn anew with shame. She pulled the crumpled letter from her pocket, the paper soft from countless readings during her long journey west. The promises written there seemed to mock her now. Words of welcome, hints of a shared future, suggestions of a comfortable home, and respected position as a merchant's wife. All lies, revealed in one horrible moment when Thomas Green had first laid eyes on her. The depot's windows began to glow as the station master lit the lamps inside. Sophia watched his shadow move across the glass, grateful at least that he'd allowed her to stay until morning. The thought of the return journey east made her stomach clench. What little money she had left would barely cover the fare. And then what? Return to Kansas, to the pitying looks of neighbors who'd warned her against answering a stranger's advertisement. A gust of wind scattered dead leaves across the platform, and Sophia pulled her feet closer to the bench, away from the dust and debris. The sound of boots on wooden planks made her tense, but it was only a ranch hand leading his horse down the street, head down against the wind. He paid her no mind, just another shadow in the gathering dusk. The depot clock struck 6, each chime resonating through the empty platform. Sophia closed her eyes, remembering how. She'd imagined this moment during the long stagecoach journey, Thomas greeting her with a warm smile, perhaps offering his arm as he escorted her to her new home. Instead, she sat alone, unwanted, her few possessions in a trunk beside her like silent witnesses to her humiliation. She could still see the faces in the crowd, some laughing openly at Thomas's cruel words, others averting their eyes in second-hand embarrassment. One woman had at least looked sympathetic, but she'd hurried away with the rest, leaving Sophia to weather her shame alone. The stage driver had been kind enough, in his gruff way, when she'd begged for passage back east. "Stage leaves at 8 tomorrow morning, miss," he'd said, not meeting her eyes. "Got room enough, I reckon." His pity had been almost as hard to bear as the townspeople's scorn. A distant coyote's call echoed off the mountains, reminding Sophia how far she was from everything familiar. Back home in Kansas, the prairie stretched flat and endless, predictable in its own way. Here, the mountains loomed like giant shadows, strange and threatening in the deepening twilight. The letter crinkled in her hands as she finally folded it and tucked it away. Her father had always said that self-pity was a poison to the soul, but tonight it was hard to find any other feeling to cling to. Still, she straightened her spine, trying to summon what dignity she could. "The Lord is my shepherd," she murmured, the familiar psalm bringing a small measure of comfort. "I shall not want." The words caught in her throat. She did want, desperately. She wanted a home, a place to belong, someone to share her life with. Was it so wrong to desire these things? Inside the depot, the station master began his evening routine, checking the schedule board and organizing tomorrow's tickets. The scratch of his pencil and the soft thud of his rubber stamp drifted through the walls, ordinary sounds that somehow emphasized her extraordinary loneliness. Sophia touched her hair self-consciously, remembering Thomas Green's sneering assessment of her appearance. Her plain brown hair was pulled back simply, as it always had been. Her dress, while clean and well-mended, showed signs of wear. She had made it herself 2 years ago, proud of her neat stitching and careful attention to current modest fashion. Now every thread seemed to proclaim her poverty, her unworthiness. The evening air grew sharper, carrying the bite of early frost. Sophia huddled deeper into her shawl, knowing she should go inside, but reluctant to face even the station master's awkward kindness. Out here in the darkness, at least she could pretend she was invisible, that the day's humiliation hadn't branded her as a figure of public ridicule in this town. She'd hoped to call home. Her stomach growled, reminding her that she hadn't eaten since morning. The bread and cheese she'd packed for the journey sat in her trunk, but the thought of eating made her feel ill. Pride and shame warred inside her. Pride telling her to hold her head high, shame whispering that she should have known better than to reach above her station. "I will lift up mine eyes unto the hills," she whispered, forcing herself to look at the mountains that surrounded Silverton. "From whence cometh my help?" The verse steadied her slightly, though her eyes stung with unshed tears. The station master's footsteps approached the door, and Sophia quickly wiped her eyes. She wouldn't add to her humiliation by being caught crying. The door creaked open, spilling lamplight across the platform. "Miss?" His voice was hesitant, kind in a way that made her throat tight. "Getting mighty cold out here. Perhaps you'd be more comfortable inside?" Sophia managed a small nod, gathering her dignity around her like armor. "Thank you, sir. I'll be in shortly." Her voice came out steadier than she felt. A small victory. He paused, then added, "Got some coffee on the stove, if you've a mind for it." "Much obliged," she murmured, though she made no move to rise. The door closed softly, leaving her once again with only her thoughts and the mountain wind for company. The town was settling into evening quiet, with only occasional voices or hoofbeats breaking the stillness. Somewhere in one of those buildings, Thomas Green was probably congratulating himself on his narrow escape from an unwanted marriage. The thought brought a fresh wave of shame, but beneath it, Sophia felt a tiny spark of anger. How dare he make promises he had no intention of keeping? How dare he humiliate her in front of the entire town? But the anger couldn't sustain itself against the weight of her situation. Tomorrow she would begin the long journey back to Kansas, back to a life she'd thought she was leaving behind. Her carefully saved money, her hopes for the future, her prayers for a family of her own, all scattered like leaves in the mountain wind. The depot clock struck 7, and Sophia shivered. 1 more hour, she decided, and then she would accept the station master's offer of shelter and coffee. For now, the darkness was a comfort, hiding her red eyes and trembling lips from view. She began to hum softly, an old hymn her mother used to sing when troubles came. The familiar melody helped steady her, even as her heart ached with loneliness and loss. The depot lanterns cast flickering shadows across the platform as evening settled over Silverton. Though most of the afternoon crowd had dispersed, a few townspeople still lingered, whispering and casting sidelong glances at Sophia. Their quiet laughter cut deeper than the autumn chill. Sophia gathered her shawl closer, finally rising from the wooden bench where she'd taken refuge. Her legs trembled beneath her skirts, stiff from sitting so long in the cold. Perhaps she could find lodging at the boarding house if they'd take her after today's spectacle. The sound of heavy boots on the platform boards made her freeze. The whispering stopped abruptly, replaced by a tension so thick she could almost taste it. Through the gathering dusk came a figure that seemed to part the remaining onlookers like Moses at the Red Sea. Kirt Boone's reputation preceded him by several paces. Even in the dim light, the scar that ran from his left temple to jaw was visible, a stark reminder of whatever violence had marked him. His buckskins and wool coat carried the wilderness with them. Pine sap, wood smoke, and something wild that made town dogs slink away. He moved with the fluid grace of a mountain lion, though his size suggested more bear than cat. The few remaining townspeople drew back, their earlier mockery forgotten. Even Thomas Green, who had orchestrated Sophia's public humiliation, took an involuntary step backward when Kirt's dark gaze swept the platform. "She's mine now." The words fell like stones into a deep pool, rippling through the evening quiet. Kirt's voice was low and gravelly, as if he used it so rarely it had gathered rust. He didn't shout, didn't need to. The authority in those 3 words silenced every whisper, every snicker. Thomas Green's face flushed red in the lamplight. He opened his mouth as if to object, then thought better of it when Kirt's attention fixed on him. Everyone knew the stories about the mountain man, how he survived winters that killed lesser men, how he traded with tribes others feared, how he kept to himself except when absolutely necessary. The merchant's usual smooth confidence crumbled under that steady gaze. Without another word, Kirt stepped forward and picked up Sophia's satchel. His movements were deliberate, unhurried, as if daring anyone to challenge him. No one did. Sophia stood rooted to the spot, her heart hammering against her ribs. This man was everything she'd been warned about in the East, wild, dangerous, unpredictable. Yet when he turned those dark eyes to her, she saw something unexpected. Behind the hardness lay a glimmer of understanding, of shared pain. "Come," he said softly, just for her ears. It wasn't quite a command, wasn't quite a request. What choice did she have? Return east in shame? Stay and face Thomas Green's continued scorn? At least this stranger had offered her protection, however rough it might be. Sophia sent up a silent prayer and fell into step beside him. They walked through Silverton's dusty streets in silence, past the mercantile where Thomas Green's name was painted in proud letters, past the church where Sophia had hoped to speak her wedding vows, past everything that had turned to ashes in a single afternoon. Townsfolk who had participated in her humiliation hours before now scurried out of their path, tugging their children inside and closing shutters. The cabin sat at the edge of town, where civilization began to give way to wilderness. Solid logs, carefully notched and fitted, spoke of skilled hands. A thin curl of smoke rose from the stone chimney, and a small vegetable patch, though autumn bare now, suggested this wasn't merely a seasonal camp. Inside, the single room was neat but sparse. A fieldstone fireplace dominated one wall, its flames casting warm light on simple furnishings. A plank table, 2 chairs, a narrow bed in one corner. Bundles of dried herbs hung from the rafters alongside cured pelts. Everything had its place, yet the space held an emptiness that went beyond mere tidiness. Kirt built up the fire with practiced movements, adding smaller sticks until the flames rose higher. The familiar tasks seemed to ease something in him, and when he finally spoke, his voice was softer than before. "Lost my wife," he said, still facing the fire. 3 years ago. Cabin caught fire while I was checking trap lines. By the time I saw the smoke, he trailed off, one hand unconsciously touching his scarred face. Sophia's heart clenched with understanding. How many times had she told her story to sympathetic neighbors after her parents passed? Some griefs were too deep for words. "I saw your advertisement," he continued, finally turning to face her. "In the territorial paper. Wrote a reply, even. Never sent it." His laugh was barely more than a rumble. "What would a proper woman want with a scarred trapper who lives more with animals than people?" The confession hung in the air between them. Sophia found herself studying him in the firelight, seeing past the fearsome exterior that kept others at bay. His hands, though calloused from work, were steady and sure. His clothes, though worn, were clean and well-mended. Even the cabin, for all its simplicity, spoke of care and attention to detail. "When I saw you today," he said, "saw how they treated you." Something dark flickered across his face. No one deserves that kind of shame, least of all someone brave enough to travel so far on nothing but hope and a promise. Sophia sank into one of the chairs, suddenly exhausted. The day's events crashed over her like a wave. The long-anticipated arrival, Thomas Green's cruel rejection, the townspeople's laughter, and now this unexpected sanctuary with a man most considered dangerous. "I should warn you," she said carefully, "I'm not much to look at." Mr. Green made that quite clear today. Kirt's response was immediate and fierce. Green wouldn't know true worth if it was written in gold dust. He paused, then added more gently, "Beauty's not just about a pretty face. It's in the way a person carries themselves, treats others, shows kindness when they've been shown none." The words warmed something inside her that had gone cold on that depot platform. Still, fear and uncertainty gnawed at her edges. This man was a stranger, for all his unexpected gentleness. His reputation was fearsome enough to silence even Thomas Green. Was this God's answer to her prayers, or another trial to endure? As if reading her thoughts, Kirt moved to the far corner of the room, giving her space. "You can have the bed," he said. "I'll sleep by the fire." "Tomorrow," he hesitated. "Tomorrow you can decide what you want to do. Stage East leaves at 8, if that's your choice, or ... quote. The word hung unfinished between them. Sophia slipped to her knees beside the bed, clasping her hands in prayer. The familiar posture brought comfort, even as questions tumbled through her mind. Was this rough mountain man, who had claimed her so boldly before the town, an answer to her desperate prayers? Or was she merely exchanging one uncertain future for another? The fire crackled softly as she prayed, its warmth reaching out like gentle hands. Outside, a coyote called to its mate, a lonely sound that echoed off the mountains. Inside, in this simple cabin that smelled of pine and wood smoke, Sophia felt something she hadn't expected to find today. Possibility. Dawn crept through the cabin's single window, painting golden stripes across rough-hewn floorboards. Sophia stirred on the narrow bed, momentarily confused by the unfamiliar scent of wood smoke and pine. As memories of yesterday flooded back, she sat up slowly, smoothing her rumpled calico dress. The cabin stood silent. Kirt's bedroll lay neatly folded by the cold fireplace, but the man himself was gone. Morning light revealed what shadows had hidden the night before. A layer of dust on every surface, cobwebs draped in corners like tattered lace, the kind of neglect that spoke of a soul too weary to care about such things. Sophia's fingers traced the rough table's surface, coming away gray with dust. She had two choices: sit and wait for whatever fate had in store, or make herself useful. The second option came as natural as breathing. "I won't be anyone's burden," she whispered to the empty room, "not even a mountain man's charity case." From her satchel, she withdrew the few precious items she'd brought west, a small packet of dried mint, and chamomile, a bar of hard-won soap, her mother's worn dishcloth. The familiar tasks of homemaking steadied her nerves. She built up the fire with practiced hands, setting water to boil for tea and washing. Dust flew as she swept with a worn broom found behind the door. Spiderwebs surrendered to her determined strokes. She hummed softly while she worked. Old hymns her mother had taught her, their familiar melodies a comfort in this strange place. When the water boiled, she measured out herbs carefully. The familiar scent of mint and chamomile filled the cabin, covering mustier smells of old leather and smoke. She found 2 tin cups, scrubbed them until they shone, and set them ready on the now clean table. The door's hinges creaked, making her start. Kirt filled the doorframe, silhouetted against the morning light. In his hands, 2 rabbits hung limp. He stopped short, blinking at the transformed space. Sophia straightened her apron, suddenly uncertain. "I hope you don't mind," she said. I wanted to make myself useful." Kirt's eyes moved slowly around the cabin, taking in the swept floors, the organized shelves, the steaming cups on the table. Something shifted in his expression. Surprise, certainly, but something else, too. Something that looked almost like pain. "Ain't seen this place so clean since." He trailed off, setting the rabbits on the outer porch. When he came back in, he moved carefully, as if afraid to disturb the new order she'd created. "I made tea," Sophia offered. "And there's cornbread from my travel provisions. It's a mite stale, but better than nothing." They sat at the table, the morning sun warming their shoulders. The silence stretched between them, not exactly uncomfortable but heavy with unspoken things. "Most folks in town," Kirt said finally, "they don't come up this way anymore." Not since the fire. His scarred hands wrapped around the tin cup. "Reckon they think bad luck might catch, like fever." Sophia broke the cornbread into careful portions. "People fear what they don't understand," she said softly. "Back in Kansas, after my parents took sick, neighbors who'd known me since birth crossed the street to avoid me, as if grief might be catching too." Kirt's eyes met hers, recognition flickering in their depths. "How long you been alone?" 2 years come winter." Sophia sipped her tea, letting the familiar taste steady her. "The farm went to my uncle. He was kind enough, but everything there reminded me of what I'd lost. When I saw Mr. Green's advertisement." She forced a small smile. "Well, I thought God was opening a door. And instead you got stuck with a mountain man who barely remembers how to talk proper." There was no self-pity in Kirt's voice, just stated fact. "I got saved from public shame by someone who recognized hurt when he saw it," Sophia corrected gently. "That's no small thing." The morning passed in quiet industry. Kirt skinned and cleaned the rabbits outside, while Sophia continued her indoor transformation. She found a needle and thread in her satchel, turning her attention to the sad, dust-gray curtain hanging crooked at the window. As she worked, she hummed again, "Amazing Grace," her mother's favorite. The familiar tune filled the cabin's corners, pushing back the loneliness that had seeped into its very walls. She was so absorbed in her task, she didn't notice Kirt in the doorway until his shadow fell across her work. He stood there, still as stone, watching her fingers guide the needle through worn fabric. Something in his face had softened, the usual hard lines eased by memory or emotion. "Sarah, my wife, she used to sing while she worked too." His voice was rough with disuse. "Different songs, but it makes the place feel alive?" Sophia suggested when he couldn't continue. He nodded once, sharply, then disappeared back outside. But something had shifted between them, like ice breaking up on a spring river. The afternoon light was fading when Kirt brought in a pot of rabbit stew, the meat seasoned with wild herbs he'd gathered. They ate in silence, but it was different now, companionable rather than strained. The cabin felt warmer somehow, as if Sophia's small touches had awakened something long dormant. Steam rose from their bowls like hope made visible. Sophia watched Kirt from beneath lowered lashes, noting how he kept glancing around the cabin as if seeing it anew. His shoulders, usually so tense, had relaxed slightly. When he caught her looking, the corner of his mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, but perhaps its distant cousin. Outside, a whippoorwill called the end of day. Inside, two lonely souls shared a meal in silence, while possibility hung in the air like the lingering scent of mint and chamomile. The days flowed one into another like a gentle stream. Each morning, Sophia rose before the sun, her quiet industry becoming as much a part of the cabin as its sturdy logs. The porch that had once collected leaves and dust now gleamed, swept clean each dawn. Near the door, tiny sprigs of mint pushed through the rocky soil, precious seeds she'd carried from Kansas, now taking root in this mountain soil. Inside, the cabin had shed its mantle of grief. Sophia's hymns filled every corner as she worked, her clear voice rising and falling with Rock of Ages, or What a Friend We Have in Jesus. The songs seemed to chase away the shadows that had long haunted the rooms, replacing them with something brighter. Kirt moved through these, changes like a man waking from a long sleep. Each morning, he'd pause at the door, taking in some new touch, a mended curtain, a scrubbed pot, wildflowers in a tin can. His eyes would linger on these small transformations before he'd shoulder his axe or check his trap lines. The steady rhythm of his axe echoed through the trees as he split wood, building up a store against the coming winter. When he returned with rabbits or a plump grouse, Sophia would be there, her sleeves rolled up, ready to help with the cleaning. They worked together in comfortable silence, each finding their place in this new arrangement. But while peace grew on the mountain, trouble brewed in town. Thomas Green's smooth voice carried far, spreading poison with each word. He held court in his store, speaking to any who would listen about the impropriety of it all. "A respectable town can't allow such arrangements," he'd say, adjusting his fine coat. "That poor woman, living unmarried with that wild man, it's a scandal. Someone must speak for decency." His words found fertile ground among those who already feared Kirt's solitary ways. Whispers grew into murmurs, murmurs into demands for action. The afternoon sun was slanting through the trees when hoofbeats approached the cabin. Sophia looked up from her mending, watching through the window as Deputy Wilson dismounted. His young face was troubled as he removed his hat, revealing hair already touched with gray at the temples. "Ma'am," he nodded to Sophia as she opened the door. "Mr." Boone Kirt had appeared silently beside her, his presence solid as the mountain itself. The deputy pulled a folded paper from his vest. "I take no pleasure in this," he said, holding it out, "but the town council insisted." Sophia took the document with steady hands, though her heart fluttered like a trapped bird. The legal language was dense, but the meaning clear enough. Without proof of a valid marriage, she would be considered a vagrant, subject to removal back east. "This ain't right," Kirt growled, his voice low and dangerous. "What I do on my own land ain't town business." Deputy Wilson shifted uncomfortably. "The petition's already gone to Judge Matthews. He'll hear it when he rides circuit next month." He replaced his hat, clearly eager to be gone. "I'm sorry, truly. But folks are set on this." After he rode away, Sophia stood on the porch, the paper clutched in her hands. The mint she'd planted seemed to mock her now, how foolish to think she could put down roots so easily. "We'll fight this," Kirt said, his hands clenched at his sides. "I'll ride to town tomorrow, tell Green and his followers where they can stick their petition." "No." Sophia's voice was soft but firm. "Violence won't help. We need to show them we're not what they think." She smoothed the paper, her mind working. "Sunday's coming. We should attend services together." Kirt went still beside her. She knew he hadn't set foot in the white clapboard church since his wife's funeral, avoiding the pitying looks and whispered judgments. "I won't hide away as if ashamed," Sophia continued. "Let them see us there, worshipping alongside them. Let them see we have nothing to hide." The lamp cast warm light across the cabin that evening as they sat at the table. Kirt's face was shadowed, the scars more pronounced in the flickering light. "Been a long time since I faced them all," he admitted. "After Sarah, their sympathy felt like stones around my neck." Sophia reached across the table, her small hand covering his larger one. "Faith isn't just for easy times," she said gently. "Sometimes it's the only light we have in darkness." Kirt looked down at their joined hands. His voice, when it came, was rough with memory. "Sarah loved that church, sang in the choir every Sunday." He drew a deep breath. "Reckon maybe it's time I remembered why she loved it so." Sophia squeezed his hand once, before letting go. "We'll face them together," she said simply. The mockingbird's evening song floated through the open window, sweet and clear. Inside, 2 people sat in companionable silence, the lamp's glow holding back the gathering dark. Tomorrow would bring its own battles, but for now, they had this moment of peace, built on understanding and quiet courage. Through the window, the first stars appeared, bright as hope against the deepening sky. Sophia began to hum softly. "Blessed Assurance," while Kirt listened, his face softening in the lamplight. They were no longer just 2 wounded souls sharing space, but partners preparing to face whatever came, strengthened by faith and each other's presence. Sunday dawned clear and crisp, with autumn painting the mountains in shades of gold and crimson. Sophia stood before the small mirror in her room, fingers trembling slightly as she smoothed her best calico dress. The fabric, though faded from washing, still held its dignified blue pattern. She twisted her hair into a neat bun, checking that every strand lay smooth and proper. The floorboards creaked outside her door. "Ready when you are," Kirt called, his voice gruff with discomfort. Sophia opened the door and stopped short. Kirt stood awkwardly in the hallway, transformed from the rugged mountain man she knew. His face was freshly shaven, revealing the full extent of the scar that ran along his jaw. He wore an old black coat that pulled tight across his shoulders, suggesting years of disuse. His hair was combed back, though a few rebellious strands fell across his forehead. "You look..." Sophia paused, searching for the right words. "You look very proper, Mr. Boone." A shadow of a smile crossed his face. "Ain't worn this coat since..." He cleared his throat. "Well, been a while." The morning air bit sharp as they stepped outside. Kirt helped Sophia mount his sturdy bay horse, then swung up behind her. The animal's hooves kicked up small clouds of dust as they made their way down the mountain trail toward town. Silverton lay quiet in the morning light, but faces appeared in windows as they rode past. Whispers followed their progress like autumn leaves skittering along the street. Outside the white clapboard church, other horses stood tethered, their riders already inside. Kirt dismounted first, reaching up to help Sophia down. His hands were steady on her waist, though she could feel tension in his grip. They secured their horse beside the others, the animal's breath steaming in the cool air. The church steps seemed to stretch endlessly before them. Sophia felt every eye upon them as they climbed, her hand resting light on Kirt's arm. The doorway gaped like the mouth of a cave, dark and forbidding. Inside, lamplight gleamed off polished wood pews. The congregation turned as one to stare, their faces a mix of curiosity and judgment. Sophia held her head high, though her heart hammered against her ribs. They found seats near the back, where Kirt's broad shoulders seemed to crowd against the narrow pew. Pastor Whitcomb rose to lead the first hymn, his silver hair catching the light. "Amazing Grace," he announced, his voice warm and steady. The organ wheezed to life, and voices rose around them. Sophia drew a deep breath and began to sing. Her voice, clear and strong, lifted above the general murmur of the congregation. Heads turned in surprise at the pure, sweet notes. Even Kirt glanced sideways at her, something like wonder in his expression. As the service continued, Sophia felt some of the tension ease from her shoulders. The familiar rhythms of worship wrapped around her like a warm shawl. Beside her, Kirt sat rigid but present, his eyes fixed straight ahead. After the final Amen, Pastor Whitcomb made his way through the crowd to greet them. His kind face showed careful neutrality as he approached. "Miss Whitley," he said, taking her hand, "your voice is a blessing to our congregation." He turned to Kirt, hesitating only slightly. "Mr. Boone, it's been too long since you've joined us." "Pastor?" Kirt acknowledged gruffly. "I trust you'll both join us again next Sunday?" The pastor's eyes were shrewd but gentle. "Yes, sir," Sophia answered firmly. "We plan to attend regular-like." Outside the church, sunlight had warmed the air. Congregation members gathered in small clusters, their Sunday best bright against the weathered boards of the church. Sophia could feel their glances, hear the low murmur of conversation. "Well, well." Thomas Green's smooth voice cut through the pleasant morning air like a knife. He stood blocking their path to their horse, his fine coat unmarked by dust. "How touching to see our mountain man trying to play at civilization." Kirt's hand tightened on Sophia's arm, but she kept her face calm. "Good morning, Mr. Green," she said evenly. Green's smile didn't reach his eyes. "I was just speaking with the railroad surveyors yesterday. Interesting fellows, quite interested in certain parcels of land." He brushed an imaginary speck from his sleeve. "Particularly that ridge near your cabin, Boone. Seems it would make an excellent route for the new line." "My land ain't for sale," Kirt growled. "No?" Green's voice dripped false concern. "That's a shame. Though I suppose your claim might be complicated now. An unmarried woman living on the property could raise questions about rightful ownership. The railroad doesn't like messy titles." Sophia felt ice form in her stomach. So this was the real reason for the town's sudden interest in propriety, not moral outrage, but greed for land. "We'll be going now," she said firmly, tugging Kirt's arm. His muscles were coiled tight as a spring, but he allowed her to lead him away. The ride home was silent, each lost in thought as the horse picked its way up the familiar trail. The cabin appeared as the sun began to set, its rough logs glowing golden in the late light. Inside, Sophia built up the fire while Kirt hung up his good coat. The familiar scents of wood smoke and pine helped ease some of the day's tension, but questions still hung heavy in the air. "They're not just after me because I'm a woman without family," Sophia finally said, watching the flames dance. "They want me gone because I'm in the way of their plans for your land." Kirt's face was dark with anger as he stood by the window. "Been wondering when the railroad would come sniffing around. Green's probably already promised them right of way." He turned to face her. "But this is my mountain. Has been since before that Peacock Green ever set foot in Silverton. No one's driving you off it." Sophia looked up at him, seeing past the scars to the steadfast heart beneath. "I believe God placed me here for a reason," she said softly. "Not just for marriage, but for something larger. To help protect what's right." The fire crackled in the silence that followed. Outside, a whippoorwill called lonely in the gathering dusk. But inside the cabin, two people stood united against the forces gathering against them, their resolve strengthened by shared purpose and growing. Trust. The autumn days flowed like honey, sweet and slow, as Sophia and Kirt found their rhythm together in the mountain cabin. Each morning brought new discoveries, small victories that bridged the space between them. Sophia stood at the wooden counter, her hands dusted with flour as she worked biscuit dough. The cabin filled with the warm, comforting scent of baking. Through the window, she watched Kirt splitting logs, his axe rising and falling in a steady rhythm. "These turned out right fine today," she said later, setting the golden brown biscuits on the table. Kiert's eyes crinkled at the corners as he took one, steam rising as he broke it open. Best I've had since... He paused, then finished softly. Well, in a long time. Sophia's heart warmed at the almost smile that crossed his face. These moments came more often now, tiny cracks in his stern facade letting light shine through. One crisp morning, Kiert led a sturdy brown mule from the barn. "Time you learned to ride proper," he said, adjusting the worn saddle. "Can't always depend on sharing my horse." "I've never..." Sophia eyed the mule uncertainly. The animal gazed back with surprising gentleness. "Old Jake here's steady as they come," Kiert assured her, offering his hand. Sophia gathered her skirts and let him boost her into the saddle. His hands were strong and sure at her waist. The mule plodded patiently as Sophia learned to guide him with the reins. Kiert walked alongside, occasionally reaching up to adjust her grip or posture. By afternoon, she had mastered steering Jake in wide circles around the yard. "You're a natural," Kiert said, and something in his voice made Sophia's cheeks warm with pleasure. That evening, as they shared cornbread and stew, Sophia told stories about her childhood in Kansas. To her delight, she managed to startle a rough chuckle from Kiert with a tale about her father's prized rooster that had terrorized the farm dogs. The sound of his laughter, though brief, filled the cabin like sunshine. Sophia found herself watching his face more often, noting how the firelight softened the scar along his jaw, how his eyes held warmth when they met hers across the table. 3 days later, they walked together gathering firewood for the coming winter. Fallen leaves crunched beneath their boots, and the air held the sharp tang of pine. Sophia's arms were full of kindling when her foot caught on a hidden root. She stumbled forward with a startled cry. In an instant, Kiert was there, strong arms catching her before she fell. The kindling scattered around their feet as Sophia found herself pressed against his chest, his heart thundering beneath her palms. Their eyes met, and time seemed to still. Something electric passed between them in that moment, something tender and unspoken that made Sophia's breath catch. Kiert's hands gentled on her arms, and she saw vulnerability flash across his face before he carefully steadied her. "Thank you," she whispered, unable to look away from his gaze. The spell was broken by the sound of approaching hoofbeats. They turned to see a rider approaching, dust rising behind his horse. The man wore a badge that caught the afternoon sun. "Message from Judge Harrison," he announced, pulling a sealed envelope from his saddlebag. "For Miss Sophia Whitley." Sophia's hands trembled as she broke the seal. The paper was heavy, official. Her eyes scanned the formal writing, and her heart sank. "What is it?" Kiert demanded, seeing her face pale. "I'm summoned to appear before the circuit judge in 2 weeks' time," she said softly, "to determine if my presence here is lawful." The rider tipped his hat and turned his horse, leaving them standing among the scattered kindling. The beautiful autumn day suddenly felt cold. In town the next morning, Thomas Green held court outside his store, his voice carrying clearly across the street. "The law will set things right," he proclaimed to his audience. "No proper town can allow such irregular arrangements. Mark my words, she'll be gone before the month is out." That evening, Sophia sat in her chair by the fire, tears sliding silently down her cheeks. The weight of uncertainty pressed heavy on her heart. "I never meant to bring such trouble," she whispered. "Perhaps I am nothing but a burden after all." The floorboards creaked as Kiert moved across the room. To her surprise, he knelt beside her chair, his rough hands clasping hers. His face showed internal struggle, as if wrestling with something long buried. Then, in a voice rough with disuse, he began to pray. "Lord," he started haltingly, "I ain't spoken to you proper since Sarah died. Anger and grief stopped up my words. But this woman you sent..." His voice caught. "She brings light where there was darkness. Hope where there was none. Don't let them take her away. Please." The simple prayer, born of such deep pain and newfound hope, wrapped around Sophia like a warm blanket. Her tears fell faster, but now they were mixed with something like joy. She squeezed Kiert's hands, adding her own silent prayers to his spoken ones. When the last words faded, Kiert raised his head. The firelight showed tracks of moisture on his cheeks, but his eyes held determination. "We'll go see Pastor Whitcomb tomorrow," he said firmly. "Get his counsel before the hearing." Sophia nodded, her heart full. In that moment she realized something profound had shifted between them. Kiert's broken prayer marked more than just words spoken to heaven. It was a sign that his heart, so long frozen in grief, was beginning to thaw, beginning to hope, beginning to heal. They sat together in the firelight, hands still clasped, while outside the wind whispered through pine boughs and stars wheeled overhead. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, strengthened by shared faith and growing love. Dawn painted the Colorado mountains in soft rose and gold as Sophia and Kiert set out for town. The morning air held an autumn crispness that made their breath visible in small clouds. Sophia adjusted her shawl against the chill, grateful for the warmth of the horse beneath her. They rode side by side, hooves crunching on fallen leaves. The familiar weight of uncertainty pressed on Sophia's heart, but she drew strength from Kiert's steady presence beside her. After his broken prayer the night before, something had shifted between them. A deepening of trust, a shared vulnerability. The town was just stirring to life as they approached. A shopkeeper swept his boardwalk while early risers hurried toward the cafe, steam rising from their coffee cups. A few curious glances followed Sophia and Kiert as they tied their horses outside the modest parsonage, but the usual whispers seemed muted in the peaceful morning air. Pastor Whitcomb answered their knock promptly, as if he had been expecting them. His weathered face creased in a warm smile as he ushered them inside. Come in," he said, leading them to a small sitting room warmed by a pot-bellied stove. "Sarah just put the kettle on." The parsonage was humble but tidy, with worn furniture and simple curtains at the windows. A well-used Bible lay open on a side table, its pages marked with careful notes. Mrs. Whitcomb, a quiet woman with kind eyes, brought in a tray of tea and corn muffins before discreetly withdrawing. "Now then," Pastor Whitcomb said, passing cups of steaming tea to his guests, "I've heard troubling reports about Thomas Green's petition." He settled into his chair with a slight frown. "A sorry business, trying to use the law to force a woman from her chosen home." Sophia's hands tightened around her teacup. "We hoped you might have some counsel for us, Pastor." The older man nodded thoughtfully, studying them both. "There is a simple solution, though perhaps not an easy one." He paused, choosing his words carefully. A lawful marriage would silence Green's petition immediately. As Kiert's wife, your place here would be secure beyond any legal challenge. The word marriage seemed to hang in the air between them. Sophia felt heat rise in her cheeks as she darted a glance at Kiert. He had gone very still, his expression unreadable, but he did not reject the idea outright. "The choice, of course, is yours," Pastor Whitcomb continued gently. "Marriage is a sacred covenant, not to be entered into lightly. But I've observed you both these past weeks. There are worse foundations for a marriage than mutual respect and shared faith." Kiert shifted in his chair, his voice rough when he finally spoke. "What of the town's opinion?" "They've shown no kindness to either of us." "The town's opinion matters less than God's blessing," the pastor replied firmly. "And I believe he often works in ways we least expect." He smiled at Sophia. "Sometimes sending angels in calico dresses to heal wounded hearts." They talked a while longer, discussing practical matters of licenses and requirements. Through it all, Sophia felt a curious peace settling over her, as if pieces of a puzzle were finally falling into place. When they rose to leave, Pastor Whitcomb pressed their hands warmly. "I'll be praying for you both," he said. "Whatever you decide." The ride home was quiet, both lost in thought as their horses picked their way along the mountain trail. Autumn leaves danced around them in the breeze, red and gold against the deep blue sky. Sophia found herself stealing glances at Kiert's profile, wondering what thoughts moved behind his stern expression. The afternoon light was growing long by the time they reached the cabin. They went about their evening tasks in comfortable silence, Kiert tending to the horses while Sophia prepared a simple supper of beans and cornbread. After the dishes were cleared away, they settled into their usual evening routine. Sophia took up her mending by the lamp, the steady motion of her needle bringing calm to her tumbling thoughts. Across the room, Kiert sat in his chair by the fire, slowly whittling a piece of pine wood. The only sounds were the crackle of the fire and the soft scrape of his knife against wood. Time stretched like honey, sweet and slow. Sophia had just finished patching a tear in one of Kiert's shirts when his deep voice broke the silence. "Been thinking on what the pastor said?" Sophia's hands stilled in her lap. She looked up to find Kiert watching her, his eyes reflecting the firelight. "Have you?" she asked softly. He set aside his whittling and leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "Ain't much for fancy words or grand gestures." His voice was gruff but gentle. "But if you'll have me, we'll stand before God and man, make it proper and legal-like." Tears sprang to Sophia's eyes, blurring her vision. Her heart felt so full it might burst. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I'll have you." Something in Kiert's face softened, years of loneliness falling away like autumn leaves. He crossed the room in 2 long strides and knelt before her chair, taking her work-roughened hands in his calloused ones. "Won't be an easy life," he warned. "I'm set in my ways, and the town—" Sophia squeezed his hands. "The town doesn't matter. What matters is that God brought us together. He can heal what's broken and make something new." Kiert's thumb brushed across her knuckles, the tender gesture speaking volumes. "Reckon we could announce it at church come Sunday," he said. "Do it proper, like the pastor said." "I'd like that," Sophia smiled through her tears. They sat together in the lamplight, hands clasped, while the fire burned low and crickets sang outside. Though uncertainty still loomed with Green's petition, Sophia felt peace blossoming in her heart like a winter rose. This cabin, once a refuge of desperation, had become something more, a place of healing, of hope, of new beginnings. Kiert's expression held a mixture of nervousness and wonder, as if he could hardly believe this turn of events. Yet there was no mistaking the quiet joy in his eyes, or the way his shoulders had relaxed, as if setting down a heavy burden. His cabin was no longer just a shelter from the world's scorn. It had become a home again, warmed by shared faith and growing love. The week before the wedding hummed with activity. Dawn found Sophia up early each morning, her hands busy with preparations, while her heart sang quiet prayers of thanksgiving. The cabin, once stark and cheerless, now held the warmth of anticipation. In the kitchen, Sophia worked steadily at the worn table, kneading bread dough with practiced movements. Flour dusted her apron as she shaped the loaves, remembering her mother's lessons from years ago. This bread would be shared after the ceremony, a humble offering, but made with love. The yeasty smell filled the cabin, mingling with the pine scent of fresh-cut wood from where Kiert worked outside. Through the window, she could see him at his workbench, bent over a small project he kept hidden whenever she came near. His fingers, usually quick with trap lines and hunting knives, moved with painstaking care as he carved. Sometimes she caught him frowning in concentration, starting over when the results didn't satisfy him. The sight made her smile. His determination to create something worthy touched her deeply. Her own preparations were simple, but meaningful. The night before, she'd taken out her best dress, the dove-gray calico she'd worn that first Sunday at church. By lamplight, she'd scrubbed every inch of fabric until it fairly glowed, Now it hung by the fire, pressed and ready. From her sewing basket, she drew out a length of cream-colored ribbon, carefully saved from her mother's last Christmas gift. With tiny, even stitches, she fashioned it into a band for her hair. Word of the upcoming ceremony spread through town like wildfire. When Sophia walked to the general store for sugar, she noticed the changing reactions. Old Mrs. Miller, who had once turned away in embarrassment, now smiled and patted her hand. "About time that cabin had a proper missus," she said warmly. The cooper's wife pressed a small jar of preserved peaches into her hands. "For after the ceremony, dear." But not all responses were kind. Thomas Green stood in his store doorway, watching her pass with cold eyes. His voice carried clearly across the street. "A farce of a marriage won't change what she is, a desperate woman clinging to any port in a storm." The words were meant to wound, but Sophia lifted her chin and walked on, refusing to let his bitterness taint her joy. Back at the cabin, she found Kiert had finished his secret project. Wood shavings littered his workbench, but his hands were empty when she approached. His eyes held a mix of pride and uncertainty. "It ain't fancy," he said gruffly, "but it's honest work." Though he wouldn't show her yet, she knew it was their wedding ring, carved from mountain pine with patient love. Sunday dawned clear and crisp, the aspens shimmering gold against the blue Colorado sky. Sophia dressed with trembling fingers, smoothing the gray calico and pinning the cream ribbon in her hair. When she emerged from the bedroom, she found Kiert waiting, freshly shaved and wearing his good coat. His eyes softened when he saw her, and though he didn't speak, his gentle nod held volumes. They rode to town together, the morning air sharp with autumn's bite. The church bell was already ringing as they approached, calling the faithful to worship. Sophia's heart quickened as they dismounted. This simple clapboard building had witnessed her first humiliation in town. Now it would see her stand proudly beside the man who had claimed her. Inside, the pews were already filling. Whispers rustled like leaves as they entered, but Sophia barely noticed. Pastor Whitcomb met them at the door, his weathered face creased in a welcoming smile. "The Lord's timing is perfect," he said softly, leading them to their places. The service began as usual, with familiar hymns and prayers. Sophia sang clear and strong, her voice lifted in praise. Beside her, Kiert joined in quietly, his deep bass surprising those nearby. When the regular service concluded, Pastor Whitcomb beckoned them forward. They stood before the congregation, Sophia's hand trembling slightly as Kiert took it in his. The pastor's voice filled the church with ancient words. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here in the sight of God." Sophia felt tears prick her eyes as they exchanged vows. Kiert's voice was rough with emotion, but unwavering as he promised to love and cherish her. When her turn came, she spoke clearly, her heart full of certainty. "I, Sophia, take thee, Kiert." Then came the moment for the ring. Kiert reached into his coat pocket and drew out a simple band, lovingly carved from pine wood. Though some might have scorned such a humble token, Sophia saw the beauty in its craftsmanship. Every groove spoke of hours spent laboring to make it perfect for her. As he slipped it onto her finger, she saw his hands shake slightly. "What God has joined together, let no man put asunder," Pastor Whitcomb proclaimed. The congregation rose as one, voices swelling in amazing grace. Sophia felt tears of joy stream down her cheeks as she and Kiert turned to face their neighbors as husband and wife. After the ceremony, church members pressed forward with congratulations. Even those who had once shunned them offered handshakes and blessing. Mrs. Miller dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief, declaring it the sweetest ceremony these old bones have seen. Children shyly offered wildflower bouquets to Sophia, while gruff mountain men clapped Kiert on the shoulder. Only Thomas Green held back, glowering from the last pew. His face was dark with thwarted plans as he watched the celebration, but even his bitter presence couldn't dim the joy of the moment. When he finally stormed out, slamming the church door behind him, few even noticed his departure. The afternoon sun was lowering as they rode home together. Golden light filtered through the aspen leaves, setting the world aglow. At the cabin door, Kurt helped Sophia down from her horse with new gentleness. Inside, she moved to start supper, but he caught her hand. "Wait," he said softly. From his pocket, he drew out a small carved wooden heart, pierced through the center and hung on a leather cord. "Made this too. Ain't much, but..." His voice trailed off as Sophia's eyes filled with tears. She reached up and kissed his scarred cheek, feeling him start in surprise at the tender gesture. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "Thank you." The evening settled around them like a blessing as they shared a simple supper of fresh bread and preserves. For the first time, laughter came easily between them. Sophia told stories of her childhood in Kansas, while Kurt spoke of his early days in the mountains. Their words flowed naturally now, the awkwardness of strangers replaced by the comfort of belonging. As darkness gathered outside, the cabin glowed with warmth and newfound joy. The wooden ring on Sophia's finger caught the lamplight, its simple beauty a testament to love's power to transform the humblest offerings into treasure. Morning sunlight streamed through the cabin's freshly washed windows, casting warm patches on the swept wooden floor. Sophia hummed an old hymn as she kneaded bread dough on the table, her wooden ring catching bits of flour. The simple band meant more to her than any gold could. Each groove and curve spoke of Kurt's patient love. Outside, tender green shoots pushed through the dark soil of her herb garden. She'd planted sage, thyme, and mint along the cabin's south wall, marking each row with careful stakes. The fragrant plants would flavor their meals and brew into healing teas. Between the herbs, she'd tucked in marigold seeds, dreaming of bright orange blooms to cheer the mountain autumn. "Reckon we could build a chicken coop come spring," she said one morning, as Kurt shouldered his rifle for hunting. "Fresh eggs would be a blessing, and I could trade extras in town." He paused in the doorway, considering. Could fashion something sturdy enough to keep the foxes out? His eyes softened as he watched her excitement bloom. "Draw up what you'd like. I'll see to getting the lumber." Each evening, Kurt returned with game or fish, pride evident in his quiet way. Sometimes he brought small surprises, wild berries, or a particularly fine piece of wood for carving. Sophia would look up from her mending or cooking, joy warming her heart at his thoughtful gestures. They settled into gentle rhythms together. Mornings began with shared prayers and simple breakfast. While Kurt worked his trap lines or hunted, Sophia tended her growing domain. She'd transformed the cabin's interior with small touches, curtains at the windows, dried flowers in tin cans, savory stews bubbling on the stove. The lonely hollow of grief that had haunted the place slowly filled with warmth and purpose. Twice a week, they rode into town together for supplies or church. Sophia noticed how people's attitudes had shifted since their wedding. The general store owner now greeted them with a nod, and women who had once whispered behind their hands stopped to chat about garden herbs and preserve recipes. Even the gruff miners tipped their hats to Sophia, while exchanging quiet words with Kurt about weather and game trails. But Thomas Green's store remained a dark spot in their peace. He watched their passing with cold eyes, his smile sharp as a knife, when customers weren't looking. Sophia tried to ignore the malice in his gaze, but it chilled her like mountain shadows. One crisp afternoon, while Sophia stirred a pot of venison stew, she heard Kurt's boots on the porch earlier than usual. His face was tight with concern as he stepped inside. "Spotted strangers up by the North Ridge," he said, hanging his rifle on its pegs. "3 men I ain't seen before. Rough types." Sophia's hand stilled on the wooden spoon. "Did they speak to you?" "Came down to ask their business." Kurt's jaw clenched. Said they were just passing through, but their eyes told different. One had Green's store tag on his saddlebag. "Sweet Lord," Sophia whispered, understanding dawning. Green was done trading in rumors. He'd hired men to force their hand. They backed off when confronted, Kirt continued, moving to check the window, but made some remarks about teaching mountain folk proper manners. His voice hardened. Want you to keep the door barred when I'm out. And don't go far from the cabin alone. Sophia nodded, her heart beating faster. She'd known Green's ambitions wouldn't fade easily, but the thought of hired troublemakers lurking in their peaceful hills sent shivers down her spine. That evening, they sat closer than usual by the fire. Sophia's wooden ring caught the firelight as she clasped her hands in prayer, asking God's protection over their home and hearts. Kirt's arm circled her shoulders, strong and steady. Been thinking, he said softly, watching the flames. Maybe come spring we could plant more than just herbs. A proper vegetable patch, room enough for little ones to help tend it someday. Sophia's breath caught at his words. They hadn't spoken much of children yet, though the hope lived quiet in her heart. I'd like that, she whispered. Teaching them to grow things. Watching them run free in these hills. They'd be strong, like their mama, Kirt said, his voice rough with emotion, full of faith and courage. And stubborn as their papa, Sophia teased gently, leaning into his warmth. Teaching them to track and fish, to read the weather in the clouds. They sat in comfortable silence, sharing dreams of future joy even as danger circled their mountain. The fire crackled low, casting dancing shadows on the walls of their home. Outside, an owl called into the gathering dusk, its cry echoing off the ridges. Sophia's fingers found her wooden ring again, tracing its smooth curves. The simple band had come to represent everything they'd built together. Love crafted from humble materials, strength born of patience and faith. Whatever Green's men might plan, they couldn't touch the deeper bonds that held their hearts. The stew pot bubbled softly on its hook, filling the cabin with savory warmth. Sophia rose to stir it, then cut thick slices of fresh bread. They ate together at the table Kirt had made, their simple meal tasting of home and belonging. Later, as moonlight silvered the window panes, they spoke of practical things, extra ammunition, storing water inside, signals they could use if trouble came. Yet beneath the planning lay a current of deep trust. Whatever storms gathered, they would weather them together. The Lord didn't bring us this far to abandon us now, Sophia said firmly, banking the fire for the night. Her voice held the quiet certainty that had first drawn Kirt from his solitude. Kirt nodded, checking the door's heavy bar one final time. In the soft glow of the banked fire, their shadows merged on the cabin wall, no longer two lonely souls, but one family standing strong against the gathering dark. The autumn morning dawned clear and crisp as Kirt set out to check his trap lines. Sophia watched him disappear into the pines, his familiar figure growing smaller against the mountain backdrop. She turned back to her morning tasks, sweeping the cabin floor and hanging fresh herbs to dry from the rafters. As the sun climbed higher, Sophia knelt beside their bed for her daily prayers. The wooden floorboards were smooth beneath her knees, worn by months of faithful devotion. She clasped her hands, the wooden ring a comfort against her fingers, and closed her eyes. Dear Lord, she whispered, thank you for this home, for Kirt's love, for your constant. A sharp crack outside broke her concentration. Sophia's eyes flew open, her heart suddenly racing. Another snap of kindling, too deliberate to be natural. Then came the acrid smell of smoke. She scrambled to her feet just as orange flames licked up the outer wall, visible through the window. The dry timber caught quickly, hungry fire spreading across the logs Kirt had carefully hewn. Smoke began seeping through the cracks, thick and choking. No, please, no, Sophia gasped. She grabbed her mother's Bible from the bedside table and stuffed it into her apron pocket. Her mind raced. What else could she save? The smoke was getting thicker, making her eyes water and her throat burn. She snatched their marriage quilt from the bed, wrapped it around herself for protection, and tried to reach the chest containing their winter stores. The heat was intense now, the roar of flames drowning out all other sounds. Sophia coughed violently, struggling to breathe in the dense smoke. The door burst open with a shower of sparks. Kirt stood there, silhouetted against the inferno. "Sophia!" His voice was raw with terror. "Kirt!" She stumbled toward him, clutching the quilt. He lunged forward, wrapping strong arms around her, and pulled her through the doorway just as a burning beam crashed down where she had stood. They staggered away from the cabin, coughing and gasping in the clear air. Sophia's legs gave way, and they sank to their knees in the dirt. All they could do was watch as the flames devoured their home. The fire roared higher, consuming everything: the curtains Sophia had sewn, the table where they'd shared meals, the bed where they'd dreamed of children. The herbs she'd dried turned to ash, and the roof timbers crackled like gunshots before collapsing inward in a shower of sparks. Kirt's face was a mask of anguish, the old scars standing out stark against his pale skin. His hands trembled as he held Sophia, and she felt him growing distant even as he clutched her close. She recognized the look in his eyes, the same haunted darkness that had gripped him when he spoke of his first wife's death. "I'm cursed," he whispered hoarsely, staring at the flames. "Everyone I love, fire follows them, burns away everything." His arms fell away from her, leaving her cold despite the heat of the blaze. "Kirt, no." Sophia reached for him, but he flinched away. "This wasn't your fault." "Green's men." "Doesn't matter who set it." He cut her off, voice rough with pain. "Fire always finds what I love, always takes them from me." Sophia pulled the singed quilt tighter around her shoulders, tears cutting clean tracks through the soot on her cheeks. Her throat ached from smoke and sorrow as she watched their dreams collapse into cinders. Yet even as grief threatened to overwhelm her, she clung to her faith like a lifeline. The sound of hoofbeats approached, and neighbors began arriving, drawn by the column of smoke visible for miles. They came with buckets and blankets, but it was far too late. The cabin was beyond saving, reduced to a blazing skeleton of what had been their sanctuary. "Lord have mercy," Mrs. Peterson whispered, hurrying to wrap another blanket around Sophia's shoulders. Others stood in helpless clusters, shaking their heads at the destruction. "Somebody ought to ride for the sheriff," Mr. Wilson suggested, his face grim. "This was no accident." But Sophia barely heard them. Her eyes were fixed on Kirt, who had risen and walked away from the group, standing alone at the edge of the trees. His shoulders were rigid with pain, his hands clenched at his sides. She knew he was replaying another fire, another loss, wounds that had never fully healed, now torn open anew. As the afternoon faded into evening, the flames gradually died down, leaving only smoldering ruins where their home had stood. Most of the neighbors departed, offering shelter that Sophia gratefully declined. She knew Kirt wouldn't come down from his mountain, and she wouldn't leave him alone with his demons. Night settled over the ridge, stars emerging in the vast Colorado sky. The remains of the cabin glowed with stubborn embers, casting a faint red light across the clearing. Sophia sat wrapped in borrowed blankets, her wooden ring the only possession she still wore. Even her mother's Bible had been ruined by smoke and water, the pages warped and illegible. She bowed her head in prayer, her voice barely a whisper in the darkness. "Lord, give us strength to bear this trial. Help me reach him. Don't let this fire burn away our love along with our home." But Kirt remained apart, a shadow among shadows at the forest's edge. When Sophia approached, he turned away, grief and guilt radiating from him in almost tangible waves. The distance between them felt wider than the mountain itself, bridged only by her unwavering faith that God had not brought them together only to let them shatter. The night grew colder, and the stars wheeled overhead, indifferent to the pain below. Sophia huddled in her blankets, watching the last embers fade to black, while behind her, Kirt stood his lonely vigil, trapped in memories of flame and loss. The first pale light of dawn crept over the mountains, painting the smoking ruins in shades of gray. Sophia sat hunched on a fallen log, the borrowed blanket still wrapped tight around her shoulders. Her eyes were red from crying and smoke, her dress stained with soot. Beside her, Kirt stood rigid and silent, his face etched with guilt and grief. The sound of hoofbeats broke the morning stillness. Mr. Wilson rode up, leading his wagon. He cleared his throat awkwardly, hat in hand. "Miss Sophia, Mr. Boone, Martha and I have plenty of room at our place. You're welcome to stay until you can rebuild." Kirt's jaw tightened. "Much obliged," he said roughly, "but no." Sophia watched as he strode to where his horse was tethered, beginning to saddle the animal with quick, harsh movements. Her heart clenched with sudden fear. "Kirt?" "I have to go." His voice was hollow, his hands fumbling with the cinch. "Can't stay here." "What do you mean?" Sophia rose on shaky legs, letting the blankets fall. "Where would you go?" "Anywhere." He wouldn't meet her eyes. "I bring only ruin. Everything I touch turns to ash." "That's not true?" Sophia reached for him, but he jerked away as if her touch might burn. "This was Green's doing, not yours. We can rebuild together." "No!" The word exploded from him like a gunshot. "First Sarah in the fire, now you nearly... I won't risk it again. Won't watch another wife burn because of me." Mr. Wilson shifted uncomfortably in his saddle. "Now see here, Boone." But Kirt was already swinging up onto his horse. Sophia lunged forward, catching his sleeve. "Please," she whispered, "don't leave me." For a moment, his scarred face softened with pain and longing. Then he wrenched away, spurring his horse toward the timber. Sophia could only watch, tears streaming down her face as his figure disappeared among the pines. The morning air felt sharp as knives in her lungs. Mr. Wilson cleared his throat again. "Miss Sophia? Let me at least take you into town." She nodded numbly, climbing into the wagon. The ride passed in a blur of grief, the jolting of the wheels matching the ache in her heart. In town, she thanked Mr. Wilson quietly and found herself walking toward the depot, her feet moving of their own accord. The ticket agent looked up as she approached his window, his eyes widening at her appearance. "Can I help you, ma'am?" Sophia stared at the schedule board, her vision blurring with fresh tears. The eastbound stage would leave in an hour. She could be back in Kansas by week's end, away from all this heartbreak. Her hand crept toward her pocket, feeling for money that wasn't there. Everything had burned. Just then, a familiar hymn drifted from the church down the street. "Amazing Grace, how sweet the sound." The notes caught her like a physical touch, stopping her in her tracks. Memory washed over her, standing beside Kirt before the altar, his rough hands gentle as he slipped the wooden ring on her finger. Their vows, spoken in trust and hope. "That saved a wretch like me." The words seemed to speak directly to her heart. She had promised before God to stand by Kirt, in joy and sorrow alike. How could she abandon him now, when his pain drove him to flee? Sophia turned away from the ticket window, straightening her shoulders despite the weight of exhaustion. The agent called after her. "Did you want a ticket, ma'am?" "No," she said firmly. "No, I'm staying." Her steps led her to the church, where she paused in the doorway. The sanctuary was empty, save for Mrs. Abigail Harlow, the elderly widow who served as church elder. She sat in a pew near the front, her clear voice carrying the hymn. At Sophia's entrance, Mrs. Harlow turned, her kind face creasing with concern. "Good heavens, child!" "We heard about the fire. Come here this instant." Sophia found herself enveloped in a warm embrace that smelled of lavender and fresh bread. The simple human contact broke through her remaining composure, and she began to sob against Mrs. Harlow's shoulder. "There now, let it out," the older woman soothed, stroking her hair. "The Lord knows your tears, dear one." When Sophia had cried herself out, Mrs. Harlow held her at arm's length, studying her face. "You'll stay with me, of course." No arguments. "But I said no arguments." Mrs. Harlow's tone was brisk but kind. "My house is too big for one old woman anyway. Now tell me what's happened with that man of yours." Sophia explained haltingly about Kiert's departure. Mrs. Harlow clicked her tongue. "Grief does strange things to a person's mind, makes them forget that running from pain only spreads it around." "I don't know what to do," Sophia whispered. "I love him, but he won't let me help." "Then you'll do what women have done since Eve," Mrs. Harlow said firmly. "You'll pray, and you'll wait, and you'll stand your ground. The Lord didn't bring you two together just to let it end in ashes." She led Sophia to her home, a neat white house with green shutters. Inside, she drew a bath and provided clean clothes, then insisted Sophia eat a bowl of stew before resting. That evening, Sophia knelt beside the narrow bed in Mrs. Harlow's spare room. The soot was washed from her skin, but she could still smell smoke in her hair. Her wooden ring felt smooth and familiar as she clasped her hands. "Dear Lord," she prayed softly, "please watch over Kiert wherever he's gone. Help him see that you didn't send me to him by chance. Guide him back when he's ready." She took a shuddering breath. "And give me strength to wait, to show him that love doesn't burn away so easily." Rising from her knees, Sophia went to the window. The mountain loomed dark against the star-filled sky, and somewhere in its shadows, her husband carried his burden of grief alone. But as she touched the wooden ring, she felt her resolve strengthen like steel being tempered. She would not run, she would not hide. She would stand firm in faith and love until Kiert found his way back to both. The mountain timber loomed dark and silent as Kiert made his lonely camp. 3 days had passed since he fled the ashes of his cabin, each night colder and more bitter than the last. He huddled close to a meager fire, his bedroll spread on the damp ground beneath a towering pine. The flames danced before his eyes, stirring memories he'd tried for years to bury. Sarah's screams echoed in his mind, mixing now with the image of Sophia struggling through smoke. His hands shook as he fed another stick to the fire. "Should have known better," he muttered to the darkness. "Should have known I was cursed." The wind whispered through the pines, carrying with it a haunting fragment of song. For a moment, he could almost hear Sophia's clear voice singing her morning hymns. The memory of her gentle presence in his cabin, her quiet humming, the scent of fresh bread, the soft touch of her hand on his scarred cheek, made his chest ache with a pain sharper than any physical wound. "Amazing grace," he whispered, the words feeling strange on his tongue. How many times had he heard her sing those words while mending or cooking? The melody followed him like a ghost through the timber, making him question his decision to leave. "No," he growled, shaking his head. "Better she find someone else. Someone who won't bring death to her door." But in the depths of night, when the fire burned low and the coyotes called across the ridges, doubt gnawed at him like a hungry wolf. Had he truly protected Sophia by leaving? Or had he merely proved himself a coward, running from the very blessing God had sent to heal his broken life? Miles away in town, Sophia sat at Mrs. Harlow's kitchen table, her hands clenched around a cup of cooling tea. Before her lay a newspaper, its headlines stark and damning. "Land dispute continues. Green claims Boone marriage invalid." "The nerve of that man," Mrs. Harlow huffed, peering over Sophia's shoulder. "Using your tragedy to press his claims?" Sophia's jaw tightened. "He thinks Kiert's absence makes me vulnerable, that I'll give up and leave." "And will you?" The older woman's eyes were sharp with concern. "No." Sophia stood, smoothing her borrowed dress with determined hands. "I am Kiert Boone's lawful wife, married before God and witnesses. It's time Mr. Green learned that truth face to face." Mrs. Harlow touched her arm. "Be careful, child. That man's ambition makes him dangerous." "The Lord is my strength," Sophia replied, though her heart fluttered with nerves. "I won't let fear rule me anymore." The bell above Green's general store jingled as Sophia entered. The merchant stood behind his counter, tall and imperious in his fine coat. His smile turned cold when he saw her. "Miss Whitley," he said smoothly, emphasizing her maiden name. "Come to purchase a ticket east at last." Several customers turned to watch, including Mrs. Wilson and the blacksmith's wife. Sophia lifted her chin, speaking clearly so all could hear. "My name is Mrs. Boone," she declared, "and I've come to tell you that your schemes end now." Green's face darkened. "Schemes? I merely seek to protect a vulnerable woman from an unstable man. Everyone knows Boone's reputation, and now he's abandoned you, just as I predicted." "You speak of protection while hiring men to burn our home?" Sophia's voice rang with righteous anger. "You talk of reputation while spreading lies to steal land that isn't yours?" A murmur rippled through the store. Green's smile grew strained. "Careful with such accusations, madam. You have no proof." "I have truth, mister. Green and God's witness." Sophia stepped closer to the counter, her eyes blazing. "I am Kirt Boone's lawful wife, married in this town's church before these good people. No amount of legal maneuvering will change that fact." "Your marriage is a farce," Green spat, his charm cracking. "A desperate arrangement between a plain spinster and a scarred recluse." "Our marriage is blessed by God," Sophia countered, "and these good people know it." She turned to address the watching townfolk. "You were there. You sang hymns at our wedding. You saw two lonely souls find belonging in each other. Will you let this man's greed destroy that?" Mrs. Wilson stepped forward. "She's right. I was there. That wedding was as proper as any I've seen." The blacksmith's wife nodded. "And I've never seen Boone's cabin so welcoming as when Mrs. Boone was there. She brought light to that dark place." Green's face flushed red with fury. "Get out of my store," he snarled. "You'll regret this defiance, I promise you that." "No, mister." Green Sophia's voice was steady, despite her trembling hands. "You'll regret letting pride and greed poison your soul. I'll pray for you." She turned and walked out, head high. Behind her, she heard the low buzz of conversation, punctuated by Green's angry commands for silence. Outside, she sagged against the wall, her heart pounding like a hammer against iron. "Well done, child." Mrs. Harlow appeared at her side, offering support. "You stood your ground with grace." "I was terrified," Sophia admitted. "Yet you spoke truth in love." "That's real courage." The older woman squeezed her arm. "Now come along. You have a letter to write." That evening, Sophia sat at Mrs. Harlow's desk, pen hovering over clean paper. Lamplight cast warm shadows as she began to write. "My dearest Kirt, I pray this finds you safe, though my heart aches not knowing where you've gone. The cabin's loss grieves me deeply, but not as much as your absence. You believe yourself cursed, my love, but I see only blessing in our union. Mr. Green continues his schemes, thinking your departure leaves me defenseless. But I stood before him today, declaring myself your wife with pride. Our neighbors remember our wedding day. They support us, Kirt. We are not alone. I understand your fear. The memory of Sarah's death haunts you still. But running from love won't heal that wound. God brought us together for a purpose. I believe that with all my heart. Come home, my husband, not to ashes and timber, but to me. Together we can rebuild, not just walls and roof, but trust and hope. I will wait for you, keeping faith that love is stronger than fear. Your devoted wife, Sophia." She folded the letter carefully, sealing it with a drop of wax. Though she had no way to send it, writing the words helped steady her spirit. Tomorrow she would ask Mr. Wilson to watch for Kirt in the high meadows where he often trapped. Sophia touched her wooden ring, its smooth surface worn familiar by worry. "Lord," she whispered, "guide him home before Green can do more harm. Let him feel your grace even in the wilderness." Outside, the mountain stood dark against the stars, keeping its secrets. Somewhere in those shadows, Her husband wrestled with guilt and grief. But Sophia's faith burned steady as a lamp in darkness, lighting the way home. The town hall's wooden walls seemed to close in around Sophia as she sat among the gathered citizens of Silverton. Late afternoon sun slanted through dusty windows, casting long shadows across concerned faces. Thomas Green stood at the front, his fine coat gleaming as he gestured dramatically. "We cannot allow such questionable arrangements to stand," he proclaimed, his voice dripping with false concern. "This supposed marriage threatens the very moral fabric of our community." Whispers rustled through the crowd, like wind through autumn leaves. Sophia's hands trembled in her lap, but Mrs. Harlowe's steady presence beside her gave her strength. Pastor Whitcomb sat quietly near the front, his weathered Bible in his hands. "The woman clearly has no proper claim," Green continued, pointing at Sophia. "And that wild man Boone has abandoned her, proving what we all knew. I have something to say." Sophia's voice cut through his words as she stood, her simple calico dress a stark contrast to Green's finery. Though her heart pounded like a smithy's hammer, she forced herself to walk forward. From her pocket, she withdrew a folded paper, carefully preserved. "This is our marriage license," she declared, holding it high. "Signed by Pastor Whitcomb and witnessed by this very community." Pastor Whitcomb nodded gravely. "I performed that ceremony myself, before God and this congregation." Sophia's voice grew stronger as she turned to face her neighbors. "You all were there. You sang hymns with us, shared our joy. My husband." Her voice caught for a moment before steadying. "Kirt Boone is a good man who has known great sorrow. When all of you scorned me, he offered shelter and respect. Our love may have started simply, but it grew true and deep as mountain roots." The room fell silent, every eye upon her. Even Green's smooth confidence seemed to falter. "I love him," Sophia continued, tears threatening but her voice clear. "I love his strength, his gentleness, his wounded heart that still dares to hope. Whatever claims, mister, Green makes about land or laws, nothing can break the bonds God has blessed." Suddenly, the back door creaked open. Heavy boots thudded on wooden floors. The crowd parted like a stream around a boulder as Kirt Boone strode forward. Though gaunt from days in the wilderness, his eyes blazed with purpose. His rough clothes carried the scent of pine and wood smoke, but he walked tall and proud. Sophia's heart leapt at the sight of him. "Thomas Green," Kirt's voice boomed through the hall. "I've heard enough of your lies." Green's face paled slightly, though he tried to maintain his superior smile. "Come to make more trouble, Boone?" "No." Kirt moved to stand beside Sophia. "Come to stand with my wife, where I should have been all along." He took her hand in his calloused one, and she felt his gentle squeeze. "You wanted my land, Green. Thought you could drive us apart with fire and fear, but you don't understand what makes a man rich." He turned to face the townspeople. "This woman brought light back to my dark world, showed me grace when I thought I deserved none. I was a fool to let fear drive me away, but I'm done running." His voice softened as he looked at Sophia. "If you'll still have me, wife." Sophia's tears fell freely now as she nodded, unable to speak. A murmur of approval rippled through the crowd. Mrs. Wilson stood up. "I say we've heard enough from Mr. Green. These are good people, and we all saw their proper marriage." "Hear, hear," the blacksmith called out. Others joined in, nodding and speaking up in support. Green's facade cracked completely. "You're all blind fools," he spat, his charm vanishing like morning mist. "This town will regret crossing me." He stormed toward the door, his fine boots striking the floorboards like angry thunder. As the door slammed behind him, Pastor Whitcomb rose slowly. "Let us pray," he said, lifting his hands. "Lord, bless this couple who have found their way back to each other. Grant them strength to rebuild what was lost and bind our community in support of their union." "Amen," the crowd responded warmly. Neighbors crowded forward then, offering handshakes and embraces. Mr. Wilson promised lumber from his mill. The blacksmith offered nails and tools. Mrs. Harlow declared she'd organize a quilting circle to replace what the fire had taken. Through it all, Kirt kept hold of Sophia's hand, as if afraid she might disappear. She leaned against his solid strength, her heart too full for words. The wooden ring he'd carved still circled her finger, a simple symbol of a love strong enough to overcome pride, fear, and malice. They had lost a cabin, but gained a community. And in each other's eyes, they found the peace that comes with knowing you are finally, truly home. The crisp mountain morning dawned bright with promise as wagons rolled up the winding trail to Kirt and Sophia's homestead. The October air carried the scent of pine and wood smoke, mingling with the happy chatter of neighbors come to help raise their new cabin. Men unloaded tools while women spread quilts beneath the aspens, laying out baskets of fresh bread and pies. Children darted between the workers, eager to help carry smaller items. The bare foundation Kirt had prepared stood ready, surrounded by fresh-cut logs stripped of bark and waiting to become walls. Sophia stood watching, her heart full, as Mrs. Harlow approached with a steaming pot of coffee. "Never seen such a turnout for a cabin raising," the older woman said warmly. "Must be 30 folks here already." "God is good," Sophia whispered, tears pricking her eyes as she watched Kirt directing the men where to place the first logs. His voice carried clearly across the yard, no longer gruff with disuse but strong and sure. The sound of hymns rose from the women preparing dinner as hammers began to ring against chisels. Amazing grace floated through the mountain air, and Sophia found herself humming along as she joined the cooking preparations. Her fingers worked quickly, peeling apples for pies while her soul soared with gratitude. "Look there," Mrs. Wilson whispered, nodding toward where Kirt worked. The once solitary mountain man stood shoulder to shoulder with the blacksmith and miller, all three laughing as they fitted logs together. "Never thought I'd see the day Kirt Boone would work and laugh with others." "Love changes everything," Sophia replied softly, watching her husband's scarred hands guide a heavy beam into place. As the morning wore on, the cabin walls rose steadily. Women called the men to dinner, and conversation flowed easily as everyone rested in the shade. Kirt sat beside Sophia, his presence warm and solid. When Mrs. Harlow asked him to say grace, he didn't hesitate. "Lord," he prayed, his deep voice reverent, "thank you for sending neighbors to help and—" He paused, squeezing Sophia's hand, "for sending me a wife who showed me how to live again." "Amen," the gathering chorused, and more than one eye glistened with tears. After dinner, Sophia settled near the supply wagon with her sewing basket. As the men returned to their work, she began stitching new curtains from fabric the women had donated. The soft muslin flowed through her fingers as she hummed, "Rock of Ages," creating simple beauty for their new home. Children gathered around to watch her neat stitches, and she smiled as young Sally Wilson asked to learn. Soon, several girls sat with her, practicing basic seams while the cabin continued to rise behind them. The afternoon sun slanted long shadows across the clearing as the roof beams were finally set in place. Kirt worked tirelessly alongside the others, his axe ringing true as they split shingles. His shoulders moved with practiced grace, and Sophia's heart swelled to see him so at ease among people who had once feared him. "Time was, old mister," Peterson remarked as he rested nearby. "Folks wouldn't come within a mile of Kirt Boone." "Now look at him. Best neighbor a body could ask for." "He always was," Sophia replied gently. "He just needed reminding." As dusk approached, the women lit lanterns while the men finished the last of the roofing. Stars began to peek through the darkening sky as Kirt set the final shingle in place. A cheer went up from the gathered community, and Sophia clutched her finished curtains to her chest, overcome with joy. Their neighbors had brought simple furnishings, too, a sturdy table, chairs, a rocking chair, and a bed frame Kirt had carved during the weeks of preparation. as darkness. Fell, everyone helped arrange the furniture inside. Sophia hung her fresh curtains at the windows, while Mrs. Harlow and the other women laid out quilts and cooking implements. Finally, as the moon rose full and bright over the mountain, the neighbors bid them farewell with handshakes and hugs. "God bless this home," Pastor Whitcomb said, standing in the doorway. "May it always be a shelter of peace." When the last wagon had disappeared down the trail, Sophia and Kirt stood alone in their new home. The fireplace crackled warmly, casting dancing shadows on the fresh-hewn walls. Sophia settled into the rocking chair, taking up her mending basket, while Kirt brought in one last armload of wood. As he stacked it carefully by the hearth, Sophia watched his movements, so different now from the wary, wounded man who had claimed her that day at the depot. His shoulders were straight, his steps sure, his eyes clear and peaceful. He came to stand beside her chair, and she reached for his hand. Their fingers intertwined, his rough and calloused, hers marked with tiny needle pricks. Together, they bowed their heads in prayer. "Thank you, Lord," Sophia whispered, "for bringing beauty from ashes, for making a home from rejection, for showing us your perfect love." "Amen." Kirt's voice was husky with emotion. He knelt beside her chair, bringing their clasped hands to his lips. "Who would have thought that day, when you stepped down from the stage looking so lost, that God had such plans for us both?" Sophia touched his scarred cheek tenderly. "He makes all things new," she said softly. Through the windows, lamplight spilled onto the mountain darkness like a beacon of hope. Inside, the fresh wood walls glowed golden, and the simple furnishings spoke of love and community restored. Where once had stood a lonely cabin haunted by grief, now rose a home built on faith and redeemed by grace. The rejected mail-order bride had found her true worth, cherished now by husband and neighbors alike. And the feared mountain man had discovered that opening his wounded heart to love had brought him not pain, but healing. Together, they had built more than a cabin. They had created a testament to God's mercy and the power of steadfast love to overcome all barriers. As Sophia rocked gently, her needle flashing in the firelight, and Kirt settled on the hearth beside her, peace filled every corner of their new beginning. The mountain night wrapped around their home like a blessing, and within its walls, two hearts beat as one in gratitude for all that had been restored. Thanks for tuning in. These stories remind us that life is more than headlines. It's about heartlines. Subscribe if you want more moments that make you pause, feel, and reflect.